welcome to our presentation. So this is for social marketing, Eat for Health, and we'll be going through our report as well as what we've done so far and what our next steps are. So the first part is our introduction as well as the coding of data. So this was the first step in our process. So in this part, our client is actually the Australian Government Department of Health. So in particular, the National Health and Medical Research Council. They actually have a new campaign called Eat for Health. And basically, it's a campaign that focuses on educating the community about dietary requirements as well as how to understand food labels in order to make better choices about food. So this is actually an increasingly important topic in today's society, especially in Australia, where our obesity rate is actually increasing. So at the moment, we're actually at 30%. So 30% of all population within Australia are obese now. So obviously, as this is a growing epidemic, it's important for the government to release information and education in order to mitigate the negative consequences that come with this, such as heart problems as well as diabetes. So in our survey, we actually had 727 respondents, and this survey actually looks into consumers' responses to 5 different ads. So those are the ads that we've looked at and analysed in order to form our results. The questions in the survey actually evaluate the advertisement, their food preferences, food knowledge, and the respondents' physical characteristics. So all these factors have been included in our research in order to draw conclusions. So the first step of the process was actually data coding and data manipulation. So in this step, we actually downloaded the data dump from Moodle and then entered it into Excel, where we looked at the entries that were outliers and then carefully considered and deleted the ones that were deemed unreasonable in order to prevent the results from being skewed. So after this, we actually imported the Excel document into SPSS, and that is when we realized that there were no measures, no values, no labels when we put the Excel file into the program. So unfortunately, because of that, we had to take time to manually code each of the objects, but also because we knew that it was an Excel format, we used that to our advantage in order to code it a lot faster, and then we also were able to manipulate the data in order to gain more insights. So using an Excel formula, we actually were able to create a BMI column which showed each respondent's BMI. From there, we actually coded each of the numbers into 5 different categories depending if the user was underweight, overweight, morbidly obese. So we used that in order to facilitate our analysis. After this, we conducted the testing, and for this we had the assumptions that all tests must have a p-value of less than 0.05 in order to be considered significant, and that if there was less than a 3% increase in adjusted R-squared, that the variable would not be considered in regression.
So now we've come to part 2 of our presentation, which is our marketing research objectives. And our first marketing research objective is to determine what type of messages are the most appealing to the general population. And we are doing this by exploring what characteristics and techniques are most effective when it comes to advertising to promote a healthier lifestyle. So how we've first approached this is by taking the 4 main ads and separating them into 2 categories, and that is positive and negative. So advertisements 1 and 2 are negative because they're more aversive and they're oriented to provoke more emotions such as guilt and fear, whereas 3 and 4 are positive as they take on a more informational and encouraging approach. So how we aim to test these advertisements is through a comparison of means. And why we're using a comparison of means is that it gives us a good summary and indication of which ads performed better overall and in which certain criteria did they do well in. So this is the summary report of all the means for the different criteria against the different type of ads. And where a rating of 5 meant they somewhat agreed, a rating of 6 they agreed, and a rating of 7 they strongly agreed to the criteria against the ad. So as we can see, overall advertisement 3 performed or was the most effective overall, as it averaged at least 5 in every category, in every evaluation criteria. And so to further examine why advertisement 3 was the most effective, we looked at all the means in the other evaluation criteria. And what we found was that ad 3 and 4 were, who were the most effective ads, also scored higher in the ad is informational, ad is positive, the ad is cheery, and the ad makes me think criterias. And these criteria being an indicator of effectiveness is backed by the last graph, ad makes me think, as it represents, in order to probe consumers into thinking about their lifestyle choices, the ad has to be informational, the ad has to be positive, it has to be cheery. So this reflects how positive advertisement is more effective than negative advertisement.
Right. So today I'll be talking about our second marketing research objective. Our second marketing research objective is to determine which demographic characteristics affect advertisement effectiveness and its preference. In other words, is to explore and identify specific physical attributes that the surveyed individual has that affects the overarching advertisement effectiveness. So with this, we're looking into things like how does BMI, age, gender, and race affect the way the individual consumer evaluates an advertisement. So what this does is that it separates the market into different segments, and we need to find opportunities within that segment so we can penetrate our market into it. So once this segment is identified, we need to figure out which advertisement this segment prefers. Right, so as we can see here, this is a linear regression model that we ran, with the dependent variable being the ad effectiveness and the independent variables being the demographic characteristics of the individuals that were surveyed. As we can see here in the ANOVA, it is significant, therefore we'd look at the adjusted R-squared. Now the jump from model 1 to model 2 is a less than 3% increase, therefore in the coefficients we'll look at the first model. In the first model we see that age is the only aspect that affects ad effectiveness. So for our second test, we ran in ANOVA. We want to know within the groups of the age, which groups are different and which are the same. So as we can see here, the ANOVA is significant, and so we'll look at the above table and see the Levine statistic is insignificant. Therefore, when we run the post hoc, we'll run a Tucky test. Now in the Tucky test, it reveals over here that ages 19 to 25 is different to the age over 40, notified with the asterisks.
Yeah, apart from exploring the effects of physical traits and demographic characteristics towards the effectiveness of ads, respondents' consciousness of health should be investigated as well. Therefore, the behavior patterns of the respondent are going to be analyzed in order to explore a potential path for a better segmentation of population. Our third research objective is to determine whether or not consumers' consciousness of healthy living affects the effectiveness of the advertisement. To achieve that, we must define questions in our survey that could indicate the behavior patterns, which are whether or not the respondent pay attention to the food nutrition label, whether they are on diet, and their food knowledge and the food nutrition knowledge. These are the questions that can be the variable impacting the effectiveness of the ads. So our methodology is to use the chi-square test for each variables, and the reason why we choose that is because it can be able to show if there is a relationship between the behaviors and the effectiveness. And the existence of relationship can be proved by asymptotic significance in the chi-square tests. Preliminarily, the result in the chi-square test shows no significant result between those variables in the effectiveness of ads. Okay, from the result of the chi-square test between the attention level and the effectiveness of ads, we can see here the asymptotic significance is 0.675, which is not significant, which shows there's no relationship between them. And in this slide, we can see is the chi-square test for the effectiveness and also the knowledge level. And we can see the asymptotic significance is 0.475, and which is also bigger than 0.05, which means there's also no relationship between them. Okay, similarly, in the last test is between whether or not the respondent is on diet and the effectiveness of ads. It doesn't show any significant relationship as well, because the asymptotic significance is also larger than that of 0.05. So in conclusion, all the chi-square tests we have conducted does not show any results. So this is our preliminary result, and therefore further exploration is required in order to investigate the underlying reasons behind the relationships, and also the relations between the behavior and the effectiveness of ads. And it also suggests that the social policymaker to invest effort to propose policy focusing on physical traits or demographic characteristics rather than behavioral patterns, because from all the test results, it doesn't show any significant results. So it also helps to create a better focus for the social policymaker, since these attributes gave an insight and also a guideline to focus on more into the physical traits and demographic characteristics.
So the next thing we're going to be looking at are the limitations of our data and how this will affect managerial decisions. So our first issue is the lack of data integrity. After running a descriptive analysis on our data, we have found that the average mean of the weight and height of our participants were quite high. So for example, we found that one participant had a weight of 120 kilograms and a height of 5 meters tall. Now, this seems very unrealistic and is unlikely to be true. So this will cause negative impact on the business, as they won't be able to target segments effectively if the data they are using lack accuracy and reliability. So the next limitation that we'll be looking at is the lack of food variety in the food preference evaluation section. So what they have on offer are things like potato chips, ice cream, pasta, cookies, etc. So this might become an issue, as it could be seen that there is an unfair trial of healthy versus unhealthy foods. Now, this has a ratio of 2 to 5, and the only healthy options that are on offer are red grapes and pasta, which are not very appealing choices. So as a result, this acts as an inaccurate representation of food preferences. The next limitation is the lack of diversity within the sample in regards to race. So out of the 721 valid participants that we had, 504 of these individuals came from an Asian ethnicity. The result is a 69.9% of the sample participants having an Asian background, which makes up more than 2/3 of the data. So the problem with this is that it creates a biased result, which defeats the purpose of determining whether or not the race affects the ad effectiveness under these circumstances. Lastly is the lack of questions that trigger an emotive response. So the dataset addresses behavioural as well as demographical factors, however it does not address psychological factors. Questions such as, based on this ad, please indicate how you feel, would allow the market manager to gain a deeper understanding of the market segments, as well as other psychological factors such as self-esteem and perception. So the last thing we're going to be looking at is the steps we're going to be taking to move forward. So overall, going forward with our project, in order to improve our project results, we will be conducting further research using SPSS in order to gain a deeper insight into the given sample data. So the accuracy of our results will depend on the further analysis of outputs versus limitations, which we will be doing in the following weeks leading up to the end of our project. Thank you.